Yep. We're just going to
Okay.
go right in. We are live. Hey, everybody. Leslie's already in the chat. Hi, Leslie.
Hi,
Hey,
Leslie.
everybody. I'm Julie Barrett, founder of Conservative Ladies of America, which started in Washington State as Conservative Ladies of Washington. Happy Monday. I'm here with my buddy, Eric Pratt, who you might know from X as @Mistral If you're not already following Eric on X, you will want to do that right away. @Mistral. Yep. So gonna let y'all know that Eric has some wind in Washington, and so he may have some connectivity issues, but we'll go for as long as we can and maybe work through some frozen stuff. I want to give everybody just a little bit of background of kind of me and Eric and how we came to be friends and working together. A few years ago, we both started testifying in Olympia, and we were often testifying on the same bills, and we would sort of see each other on Zoom. And then we connected on X, which was Twitter at the time. And as it turned out, we had both had our encounters with Washington's anti-parent laws. And so together we both kind of had this bee in our bonnet to kind of dig into how did we get here. And so over the years, we Eric and I have stayed in contact. Eric has worked closely with Conservative Ladies, and actually, Eric, I was thinking about this earlier today. It was you that really encouraged me to start doing videos and putting videos on YouTube with our bill of the day. And video was not something I was really comfortable with, but you encouraged me to do that. And so look at us now. We have over 10,000 subscribers now, and it's awesome. And you guys are all so supportive. We've got so many new people joining us on YouTube and learning about the work that we're doing. So we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your support and for being here. I was going to play that video that you posted the other day. Eric posted a video on X the other day about an RCW that was really making him angry. And I saw that video and I said, hey, do you want to do a live stream and dig into this RCW? Because when Eric and I see things like certain RCWs, we go fishing around to see, we want to connect the dots. How did this law get to be the way it is today? What were the steps to get here? And so, Eric, I'll let you tell a little bit about like what's this RCW that we're going to kick off with, and then after we go down the rabbit hole with this RCW, we're going to go into some current legislation. But Eric, why don't you tell everybody about this bad RCW we don't like?
Yeah, you bet. Well, once again, thanks for having me. Glad to be a part of the effort. So several years ago, this RCW kind of smacked me in the face as a result of sort of an interaction with my child's general practitioner. My kid, one of my children, had just sort of turned 13, actually turned 14 at the time, and she was going in to get some routine stuff kind of going on, and this was during COVID, and so I wasn't a part or allowed to be a part of the sort of interaction with the doctor. It was very brief, but anyway, the end result was the doctor said, well, I can't really share with you what happened. And she cited this RCW. I won't go into the details about what sort of ensued, but the RCW that she leaned on here was RCW 71.34.530, and it's concerning the outpatient treatment of adolescents. And it basically says that if your child is considered an adolescent, they do not need to get parental permission to get outpatient treatment. And so this kind of got my hackles raised because my daughter at the time had been given some medication as a result of this. And so I needed to know kind of what was going on with the medication, how to administer it. I had questions about medication interactions. anyway, the doctor just wouldn't share any of this information. And it was all because of what the doctor at the time said this RCW covered. So it started me thinking, like, sort of what's going on here, that something so simple is apparently being used so broadly to cut me out of not just the input about the care itself, not even guidance as far or taking part in the determination of care for my child, but just literal information about what's going on. Why, how often are my children supposed to be taking drugs? Why are they being administered, and things of that nature. So really my central point of concern started with this RCW. And then it sort of, blossomed from there, because as you and I both know, there's just an expansive web of law that sort of gets and wrapped around children's health care, whether it's mental or even physical now. So, but this one right here, I think, is probably one of the most broadly and most recklessly used to children's detriment overall. Because as this law was created, like back in 1985, when it was really starting to be developed, these behavioral health laws, the idea of behavioral health was a much different thing. And the idea of parents' involvements was also different. There's a lot more sort of family-focused treatment instead of just child-focused, which I think, for better or worse, and it depends on the situation, that migration may be getting sort of bastardized as we've developed and evolved, and our legislatures have changed hands and are sort of single-sided in their ideology currently. And that spilled over into the sort of the medical boards and how they develop techniques and practices to sort of that the doctors use. So what are we looking at? What's the central point here? RCW 71.34.530.
Yeah, and I'll put that graphic back up, and we will go kind of through the years. And one of the things that you mentioned, which I just wanted to tag on to, is this idea of providers not including parents in sort of that healthcare discussion. It seems like when these laws are created, and everybody always says, when these bills are going through the legislature, well, this is to protect homeless kids or kids with abusive parents or whatever it is. But it's not, though, because if that was the case, then providers wouldn't default to excluding parents. Right. So that's not really what it is. And I have to just take a pause here, because one of my kiddos, my littlest kiddo, is in the chat. Hannah said, "Hey, Mom." So shout out to Hannah. And she watches my videos and gives me feedback. The 18-year-olds are good at coaching an old mom on how to do this right. So everybody give Hannah a little shout out there in the chat. Say hi to my kiddo. She just had her wisdom teeth pulled today too. So, all right, let's go through the RCW. So as Eric mentioned, it's RCW 71.34.530. Now you can, if you are like us and you want to go down the rabbit hole, you can type that RCW into Google or whatever search engine you use, and you can start going, kind of figuring this out. When you do pull up the RCW, it links you to all of these bills, and you can go pull up all these bills. Now, this goes back to 1985. 1985 is when this RCW was created. And as Eric mentioned, it establishes a comprehensive framework for juvenile mental health services. So these are my little summaries that I got from Grok. So it allows minors to access outpatient and inpatient treatment based on age and consent, while balancing clinical needs, parental rights, and safeguards against unnecessary hospitalization. Again, this is from Grok, so this isn't necessarily fact. Grok is pulling all of this from, I just fed it the actual text of the bill. from the bill is called Chapter 354. This is again from 1985. So you can't even look it up on the WALEDGE website. But then it outlines procedures for voluntary and involuntary commitments. So when you look back, 40 years ago on this, and that makes me sad to say that 1985 was 40 years ago, because that makes me feel really old.
We're doing great, though.
We're doing great. We are doing
Yeah.
great. Like, you look at this, and who do you think who was the target demographic that they felt they needed to make this law for?
I think it was youth at risk. It was kids that were maybe on the streets or didn't have services accessible to them, didn't have parents or a solid foundational home. Maybe they had drug abuse issues. 1985, there was quite a bit of sort of I think the growth of the modern drug culture into sort of mainstream in 1985, and you were probably starting to see that. So to me, that's what this looks like. I mean, if we really look at the original bill, it was a engrossed substitute Senate Bill 3009 back in 1985. It's a lot to it. That particular RCW at the time, there was a lot going on there, and it even covered how parents can interact with this behavioral health allowance for minors. So it identified a path for parents to take part. And so at the original bill, they very much, they're in the spirit of what's been written in that bill. They knew that parents were a critical stakeholder here. They knew they weren't cutting them out, but they knew they had to address an issue for kids that didn't have those positive stakeholders in their lives. And so I think that's, when I go back and I read that, that's what I see. I see them really wanting to address an apparent issue for, this is something new. They're trying to add something to the RCWs to develop the landscape for this, but they're also making sure that parents have the ability to take part to a certain degree. Yes, kids can ask for it, but also parents are a part and parcel to this whole situation. So this particular bill, even though it's sort of the opening shot here or laying the foundation for something we're going to see progress into the next bills, it's a fairly, for the time, a pragmatic way to address what I think is a rising problem.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I look at now is, the whole mental health field, and how it, and even if you look back before 1985, I mean, there's been abuses of patients in the mental health field for such a long time. And it's interesting that, like, there's this part of me that believes that the people spearheading this effort for these laws knew exactly what they were doing. And they couldn't just they couldn't go 0 to 60 all in one bill. They had to inch it slowly. It's that boil the frog kind of deal, right? So people weren't, I guess, as aware, because there would have been a lot of pushback. And I think in 1985, there might have been a little bit more balance in the Washington legislature. Okay, so then we go to 1995, and I forget what bill number this is. I'm looking at my little spreadsheet here. Is it?
It's engrossed second substitute Senate Bill 5439, and it has to do with Chapter 312, Section 52.
Thank you. ESSB 5439. If any of you want to look that up, I think that one's available on the WALEDGE website. I forget. It might be 98. It might be the next one that's available. But this one was aligns. This one kind of created the Becca's law, or maybe that's one of the next one that creates Becca's law. But again, we're looking at protecting at-risk youth. And this whole, I think words are really important here, because we still see this today as balancing family involvement. And we're going to get to the word family here in a few minutes, because the legislature changed the definition of family in 2021. And so I feel that this is all very strategic. And, it's, this particular one removes the minor's consent for patient-initiated treatment. Which I guess would at the time would have been good for parents. That has since been reversed. And so it is very hard to do what is now called family-initiated treatment. It's very difficult to do that in Washington. Do you have any additional things you want to say about this one?
No, but I think you're right. I mean, you start to see some changes going on that are being leveraged by people who maybe not have the greatest of intent in the long run.
Yeah.
It looked like this bill in particular didn't really change a whole lot. I mean, it does change some of the consent of the minors, not required, like you said, and then it adds some stuff at the very end. But the RCW itself is actually pretty expansive still at this stage.
Right.
Like, there's a lot going on there. And I think it's important that people understand, this law, this particular RCW that right now is only a couple of sentences, used to be a number of sections. So what's happened since that original one is it's just been sort of changed a little bit and then condensed. And the problem is now we face is, because it's been condensed, the idea it can be used in a broader spectrum or for broader things. For this one, it's not a huge, nothing particularly huge in the change. There is a little bit, but nothing terrible. I think when we come up on the next couple is where we start to really see a change overall.
Yeah, I think these final two lines on this graphic are really important. And again, this is a summary that I got from Grok, but I think it summarizes it very well. Is that this reflects prioritization of youth access to treatment over mandatory parental notification. So, they are prioritizing what the kids want over even, and that's not parental consent. That's just parental notification. Right. So they're not even, and we've seen that here in the last couple of years with Senate Bill 5599, giving kids access to so-called gender affirming care or abortion without parent notification, putting them up in a host home without parent notification. So we've come a long way, haven't we? Okay, this is the 1998 Senate Bill 6208 created the Becca Act, enhancing support for at-risk youth in Washington by improving access to crisis residential centers, mental health and chemical dependency treatments, allowing parental initiation of care without minor consent, and authorizing limited juvenile detention for court-ordered noncompliance. Amends multiple statutes to balance parental authority, youth rights, and judicial oversight while aiming to protect vulnerable minors from exploitation and facilitate family reconciliation. So another key word there is protecting vulnerable minors. And really that's up to the discretion of the providers. Wouldn't you say, Eric?
I think it can be. Yeah. I mean, looking at this particular law, this is where they start to wipe out all of the meat of that original 1985 bill. I mean, they basically just take a pen and just start scratching stuff out here. So any implied protection or involvement of the parents in the original is now been removed overall at this point. So if you go back and look at the substitute Senate Bill 6208, it's like they just took a pen and just started redacting stuff out here. So the goal, again, kind of like what you're saying, is it really starts to, the momentum's been sort of started, and now that ball is starting to roll downhill, and we're starting to see them just wipe any potential protections parents had in involvement and knowledge of the healthcare at this point. So
I wanted to add Joy's comment to the screen because this is a really critical piece, that the Becca bill was twisted during COVID to remove parents who wouldn't give them the jab. And that is true. And that's, both Eric and I, when we confronted these laws, was during COVID. Sorry, just listening to my husband yelling at the cat kind of cracks me up. And I think this is a really good time to point out how COVID was used to really accelerate the use of a lot of these laws and implement more of them. I mean, since 2020, Washington has seen dozens of laws that really accelerate this whole idea of child alienation from their parents. And that is, think about, Inslee had emergency powers for 975 days. And so if you went into any hospital or medical clinic, it was just send in the patient, parents can't go. You had to wait outside. And so they drug that out for a very long time. And it wasn't because people were dying and sick. It was very nefarious. And I think it's really important that people don't forget what happened during COVID, because what we're seeing in this legislative session in Washington is definitely an effort to be able to enact some of those same controls and powers over citizens, maybe even worse than during COVID. So just wanted to slip that in there. Okay, shall we go on to 2006?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, House Bill 3139 allows kinship caregivers and other authorized persons to consent for mental health care for minor children. This was passed unanimously by the House and Senate. We love bipartisanship.
Yeah, we do. It's this one, it looks like to me, in the Becca bill, obviously the Becca bill, it did a lot more than just dealing with this particular RCW. If we just sort of narrow it down, and I think this is kind of what I've done with 53 or 530, the RCW, the last one really just wiped it out. I mean, it really took that and just raised the whole area, and it said, we're going to leave this section, the first phase, or one of the most important sections where a minor can consent. And this one, it changes how the person is authorized. And I'm going to read this here, and this is the additional section. It says, or authorization from a person who may consent on behalf of the minor pursuant to RCW 7.70.065. So I think this is where we start to see where we can broaden the envelope of people who can influence this situation. Mm-hmm. So now we've restricted the parents away from the ability to stay involved in any way possible, to petition, to go through process. And now we're adding on other people possibly. And I could be wrong here, but that's what this one reads to me like. So back in 2006, we're saying, okay, now we've restricted the parents, but now we need to find other people who can influence the children's decisions in their healthcare. And I think that's what we're seeing here.
Yep.
It doesn't do a lot in the text, but I think its effect is a lot bigger than we realize. So, And it's worth noting too that, this 2006 was sort of the era that social media and, a lot of more focused online presence was really starting to take off. Phones were in everybody's pockets, smartphones. I don't remember if I had, but we were still running the flip phones back then, I'm pretty sure.
Right.
But we were still starting to be really connected more so, and I think what we start seeing as this law craft is happening from this point forward is a response to some of the mental effects of social media and that continued online presence. And that's
Yep.
that's supported by, I think, some of the medical field sort of took the position sort of around that 2010, 2015, that there was a major mental health care crisis on the horizon because kids were really starting to get involved with online and being online too much. I think they call it, we call it the screen time problem or whatever you want to call it. But I think this is right about the time where we start to see that stuff happen.
Yep.
So,
Absolutely. And I
yeah.
put TZ's comment up on here because this is something I think that
Yeah.
it's easy to sort of look at this comment. Under Soviet communism, there were efforts to separate children from their families, particularly in the early stages of the revolution. I think it's easy to sort of dismiss this comment and be like, well, we're Americans. We don't, we don't have to worry about that. And I think if you pay attention to this stuff, if you sit through the legislature, if it's personally impacted your family, your children, you take that very seriously and you see exactly what is going on. And so I would just encourage people to, history is, what's the saying? History is a good indicator of the future, or something along those lines. But if we don't learn from history, we're going to repeat it. And I think that Washington is currently giving us a really good example of repeating history, and they're starting to go there very fast, very quickly. It's accelerating. I would say this session is really off the rails.
Yeah. Well, I think for me, and I don't know if this is the case for you, but for me, for a lot of my life, I looked back on such that comment and you realize and you go, yeah, that's true. Ty's comment or TZ's comment is absolutely true. But I looked back on that at a period of my life and said, but it's not happening, and when it does, I'm gonna be able to recognize it because I have history to look back to, and we do. But what's happening, I think, for most people, and this includes me, is it's incremental. Like you said, the boiling of the frog, that small bit. In my case, my eyes were opened at a pretty mundane time of life. Like there wasn't really something serious and in crisis for my child at the time. I just recognized this very mundane interaction with my child's general practitioner as being indicative of a larger problem potential
Mhm.
here that
Yep.
I may not be facing, right at this particular time, but that there will be families around Washington state who will hit this roadblock and it will cause substantial harm to them going forward. And I think recognizing that in these small things, this small RCW 71.34.530 has huge impacts, and a lot of
Yep.
and before it hit me, you know, I didn't necessarily realize it. And I think a lot of people sort of shy away from that and they go, yeah, but it'll never happen to me. Or my child will consent, they'll let me in. I've got a good relationship. And all it takes is that one moment where you don't,
Amen.
and then all hell breaks loose. So,
Or they're just in crisis and they're being impacted by an activist social worker.
then you have that too. Yeah.
I thought I had a good relationship with my children, but if they're in crisis and they are working with activist social workers at a hospital in Western Washington, those people that are working there are they are activists, and they are manipulating children and encouraging children to make life-altering decisions that they are not mature enough or prepared enough or in a mental state that they should be making.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I as adults, we can probably both say that, when I'm, if I'm having, a bad day or just not in a really good mental state or something, I might not make the clearest decisions. If I'm
Yeah.
stressed out or anxious or whatever, I might not be in the best place to make a decision. You're 14 and you're in a mental hospital and you're making decisions for yourself. That may not be, that definitely isn't good. I mean, if a child is truly homeless and does not have parents or caregivers or somebody that's looking out for them and protecting them, that's a different story. But that's not the case for most children. Okay.
Right.
Anything else on this particular bill you want to? Okay, let's move on. Okay, 2019, they expand this access and they're calling it the Adolescent Behavioral Health Care Access Act, just on the heels or nipping at the heels of COVID-19. Which, as y'all know, was right around the corner, less than a year around the corner after this bill was passed. I wonder, it would be interesting just to see how many states have laws like this that were sort of expanded upon right before 2020. But this expanded on that, enhanced the minor initiated and family initiated mental health, substance use disorder treatment. And then I put the votes in there because I thought that was important. In the House, you had bipartisan support. Unanimously passed in the Senate. And so here's the thing, you'll hear Republicans say, well, we thought we were helping kids, but I've come to a point where I can't buy that excuse anymore, because these are the people that had a responsibility to see beyond what was right in front of their faces. Right. And to put all these pieces together, to look in the past and see how they were slowly chipping away at parental rights. So have you dug into, I didn't put the bill number in here. I think it's like 1847. Do you have it in front of you?
Yeah. Yep. It's 1874 from the 2019 session.
Thank you. So House Bill 1874 from 2019, you can go on the ledge.wa.gov website and pull that up, and you can read it and look at the roll calls and all that.
Yeah, what's interesting here to me, and again, this bill does a lot more than just chain this particular RCW, the one that we're discussing. But the effect on this particular RCW is actually, again, textually very small. It's just taking the word minor 13 years or older, so a defined point in a child's life, right? 13 years of age or older. Basically striking that out and just adding the term adolescent. So now we've changed potentially how this law can operate if later on down the road we can redefine the term adolescent. So now we've taken away, whatever that specific language means for minor 13 years or older, and changed it to a potentially sort of subjective and changeable term in using adolescent here. So I think for people, maybe they think, oh, that's not a big deal. That's not a big issue. Of course, an adolescent is that a kid in that age range. It's like, but you understand now all they have to do is somewhere else in this section redefine the term adolescent to encompass something else, and then that changes the effect overall on this RCW. Again, I think you and I can both agree the writing's on the wall here as to what they're really trying to manipulate, and really trying to keep the parents and capture the kids, just like the commenter said there, is
right.
alienate the kids from the parents and make sure that, the people involved, whether it be the social workers or the or medical professionals that have their own sort of ideology, they get precedent over the stewardship of the parents.
Right. Right.
Pretty terrible.
Let's fast forward into the current session, and we can kind of dip back into sort of the last few years too. Did you want me to share real quick before we go into current legislation? Should we look at the that PDF that you sent me?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, pull that up.
Okay.
So this was given to me when the situation with my child happened, sort of like, because with mine, I went on full response mode. First thing, started writing an email. Why are you not telling me what's going on? Like, that was my immediate response the moment I got home. Like, it was only a matter of a few minutes. Because like you said, during COVID, I was completely cut out of the actual in-person stuff. So this is what they gave me as a matter of my sort of campaign to push back against what happened. And this was from Jefferson County Healthcare and sort of what was going on. So this just gives their rundown of their policy and sort of an explanation as to how they implement it in relationship to the treatment of minors.
I wish I could blow it up. I don't know how to blow it up. But if anybody wants a copy of this, just shoot me an email, julie@conservativeladiesofwa.com, and I will email you a copy of this. This is from what, Jefferson County, is that right?
Yep.
But this is a statewide, these are state laws. So wherever you are, and you can look it up. You could just Google your county and treatment of minors protected health information, and it will pull it up. So this is what they gave you. And of course you still have to pay for it.
Yep. And it's pretty extensive. Right there at the first page, it lists basically in which specific circumstances in which a minor can consent to his or her own care, emergency medical, reproductive health care, emancipation or marriage to spouse who is 18 years or older, pregnancy termination, HIV, sexually transmitted disease, outpatient substance abuse care, outpatient mental health care. So there's a pretty broad list to be used. What isn't covered there, really?
Well, in that year, they didn't have gender affirming care on the list, so that would be added.
Yeah, this was back in 2021. So it was still, we were right in the middle of the COVID response. And so I think some of these policies may have changed since then, but it's interesting to read. And if you look at this through the lens of concern about how it could be abused, which I don't think a lot of people do, but I think you and I do now coming through. But if we look at it through the lens of what could this potentially be used for, it's pretty expansive.
Yeah, and that's the reason I think that both you and I are so outspoken about this, because people don't look at it through this lens. You and I didn't look at it through this lens until we were confronted with having to look at it through this lens. And so what we're trying to do is spare people from having to have this experience and to take steps to protect your children, protect your family, so that you can, take steps to, have your child sign a release of information with all of their providers on the day they turn 13. And you may want to consult with an attorney to make sure that all of that is legally in place with all of the providers. And, of course, your child, if you're sending your child to public school in Washington, good luck. No, the school can send your child off for care and with unbeknownst to you, without your consent or even notification in many cases. So These are just things that people need to be really aware of. And I'm afraid that it's going to become much more commonplace, to the point where it's it it's not the I can't think of the word I'm trying to say, but it happens more than it doesn't happen, right? And everybody knows somebody that it happened to. So
Yeah.
uh,
We'll be the oddity to push back against this sort of stuff. We won't
right,
be the norm. I think we're already there, to be honest. I mean, I try not to be too cynical, but when I tried to address this, when it happened to me, to the people around me, to let them know, they didn't really see any real reason. A lot of the answer was, well, just get your child to consent. I said, yes, I
right,
understand that point. I get that point. Me and my kid, she'll sign it. It's not a problem. But what if a child's in crisis and won't? And I'm not thinking about necessarily even my family situation here. We're thinking of the other way. So
yeah,
the idea that, but people sort of made excuses for it in their minds. They said, that's really not that big a deal, and why shouldn't kids?
right,
Kids need that health care. It's like, okay, yeah, I do agree that kids need health care, but they need an advocate, and they need parents to maintain that advocacy. And if you put a legal wedge in between parents and their ability to advocate for their children in crisis, that child in crisis is going to exploit that weakness. I mean, and it's going to be to the detriment of the child in a lot of cases. And if
yeah,
somebody, God forbid, somebody's ideologically sort of minded to want to interrupt that advocacy as well, they can exploit that weakness too. And
yeah,
that's where predation comes in. That's what happens anytime we see, non-consensual relationships perhaps start, where you look at like sex trafficking and stuff like that. I mean, that's the
mhm,
same MO that people will use in that case. They
right,
separate the child from their support structure, and then they get them addicted to whatever it is they're going on, whether it's drugs or whether it's thinking of some kind, and then they maintain that wedge. And I don't think people connect the dots here and see how that's
no.
potentially problematic.
Yeah. And very much related, and you're absolutely right. It's the same tactics. And
Yeah.
what we ended up having to do was, we were able, what we had to fight to get our daughter out of Washington State back in 2021, get her transferred over to a hospital in Boise. And that was even a fight to get that done. But I just want Washington parents to know, like, if you find yourself in that situation where you're dealing with a provider in Washington State, and if you can get your child out of Washington State, you need to do that, because you can actually be the parent in another state. If you're like, when our daughter was in Idaho, and the providers called me before they did any med changes or anything like that, and told me about the medication. What does it do? How often would she take it? I had to give permission for them to give the medication, which you would think, well, yeah, that's how it should be. And it is how it should be. And in other states, that is how they do it. And and so, Washington is definitely its own sort of country. And Joy just typed in something about the Commie Coast, and that's very true. And it's like that all along the coast. You got to go outside of the West Coast.
Well, see, I think this is also, you bring to light a great point. And one of the reasons that I feel that the rest of the country should be invested in what's going on here in Washington. And we've talked about this. It's not the first time. I'm not the first person to bring this up, but it can't be screamed loud enough to the rest of the country, is if somebody's child from another state enters into Washington, now they're under the umbrella of Washington law. So even though you might live in another state, or Idaho, or Montana, or a deep red, let's go down to Arkansas, anywhere, and your child makes it into one of
Yep.
these places where these laws are in place, I mean, now they affect you directly. And that may be, that may not happen often, but the potential is there. And they're hiding. I mean, that is a way that the Washington state is affecting the rest of the country. I doubt that I would be willing to bet a certain amount of money that it's happened before, and just like any trafficking, people are going to exploit that. If somebody gets somebody to come into Washington and maybe they don't have the best of intentions with them, they are away from that stewardship of their parents, that advocacy of their parents, just by the fact that they've been brought into Washington. So the rest of the country should really be paying attention to this and saying, wait a minute, this is a weak point for our kids too here, right. Not just you. You're right, getting them out of there is a good step, but people can take them in there now too.
Right. And that was, I'm talking 2021. So that was before Washington enacted the SHIELD law, which 18 states have enacted a SHIELD law since Roe was overturned in 2022. And I made a video about this a couple weeks ago. There's a lawsuit right now. There's a couple of lawsuits between Texas and Louisiana and New York, because of their SHIELD law that impacted Texas and Louisiana children. I know that there was a lawsuit between Idaho and Oregon over a young girl who was abortion trafficked into Oregon. This is going to be very common. And I actually had an exchange with a state senator here in Florida on X the other day, because I'm very interested in helping advocate for policies here in Florida that are going to protect Florida children from SHIELD laws in blue states. And so what can these red states do to protect the children in their states? And, like you said, people should care about what's going on in these blue states that have these SHIELD laws, because it is going to be sort of like a war between red and blue states, because this is the blue states that are allowing for this trafficking of kids for these services. They're promoting this, right? Like, you've got these pedophiles and these people online who prey on these vulnerable children to take them to states like Washington. So I think common sense people all across the country need to care about what's going on. And it's easy, I think, for a lot of people to leave Washington and to move to a red state and kick up their heels. As everybody knows, that's not been what I have done, because I'm very invested in, trying to alert people in Washington and save as many kids. We may not be able to save the legislature and Olympia from what they're doing, but if we can save some kids from some of these harms, that's really important. So you're absolutely correct that this is going to become an issue and it already is, that reaches beyond the walls of Washington state.
Yeah. That's where I think one of the biggest fights we have as advocates ourselves and activists ourselves is first getting through that initial wall face to face, where people start to think, well, yeah, but that's really not that bad because it hasn't really touched them yet. Like, right. We need to get that out there, and you got to really look at this from a bigger, a wider view here as to what the effect is. Because some of these laws, they don't just affect Washington state. They affect the country in a lot of ways because of their effect.
Absolutely.
It's
I do want to make a note on the SHIELD law in Washington, which was passed in 2023. It was House Bill 1469, and they have I think it's Senate Bill 56. It's either 5632 or 5623. I think it's 5632. It expands on the SHIELD law, but what Senator Drew Hansen, who is the prime sponsor of the bill, when he was presenting it in committee, he was just gushing about how they passed it. It was passed along, with bipartisan support in 2023. And that's because two Republicans in the House voted yes on the SHIELD law in 2023. And this is something that I was very naive, but I have to admit I was surprised when I started going down the rabbit hole to see how many of these laws were passed with strong bipartisan support.
I agree. Obviously I can't know the intent of every legislature. I only know my own. I think they're looking at some of this stuff through rose-colored glasses as well. I hope, and this is still me latching on to my hope, but I hope it's not malintent with some of that. I think some of those votes are misguided, and I disagree with them 100%. But they may just not think about it. I mean, they're human like me, and just like me, prior to my interaction with these various laws that got my interest in them, they don't know. I don't think, and they probably have a political agenda, okay, combined with a lack of understanding, perhaps, of the implications here, and maybe a disconnect.
For sure.
There's a lot of that, and they make bad votes. And I think holding them accountable, it hasn't been done nearly enough. And I think that's where we get it right. And I really appreciate it when you hold them accountable for these bad votes. Yeah.
And to that end, I will say, while they are human and of course they make mistakes, I also think that's their job. Their job is to vote on bills, and rather than we get dismissed a lot by the Republicans. You just don't understand the bill. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It might say that, but it doesn't. That's not the intent of the bill.
Yeah, that's where we run into the problems with them, is when,
right.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I don't think a lack of accountability is warranted. They need to be held accountable. But it's sort of like when I filed a complaint with the Washington Medical Commission about the incident that happened with my daughter. Like, I went full on, like, let's find out. Let's go all the way to the end of this to make sure it's, what's going on here. They've said the same thing. I mean, this is the investigative portion of the Washington Medical Commission who said, yeah, but that's not what those laws were for. And I said, I understand that, but that's what they're being used for now. And so that really brought to my mind too, like, these people don't a lot of times know the effect of these laws that they're investigating. Like, this is where you're supposed to be, knowledgeable about. And these doctors are using it, and you're telling me that you're their regulatory body, and you're telling me that that's not what they're supposed to be used for. But then you return and say, yeah, they're actually operating within their envelope of authority when they do this. There's just a lot of lack of oversight, a lot of lack of future forward looking as to the effect of this stuff. I would hope that people like us help, but I think their own hubris stands in the way.
Yeah, and I just want to put in a word about, like, through our interactions with providers in Washington State, because from 2021 until midway through 2023 when we moved, had a lot of interactions, and I did have some really great providers who were extremely frustrated by the laws and would admit to me, these laws don't allow me to do what is right for your child.
Right.
And so there are providers that are kind of stuck in the system and bound by these laws that they don't agree with. And then of course you have your activists in the system that love the laws, and they're part of the problem. And I've had plenty of interactions with those people too. Just wanted to put Jennifer's comment up on the screen, because sometimes they have no real effort to find out what a bill is about, and that is true. And
true.
I think, I know I can't speak for you, Eric, but I know I've reached out to legislators and tried to educate them on certain bills. Especially, there was a media literacy bill a couple years ago that I emailed all of the Republican caucus. I was still living in Washington State. Nobody responded to me. But it was clear that because of their votes that they didn't understand why media literacy was bad, because they'd all voted for it. But then, sometimes I think, they're playing politics and there's money involved, and especially with education, they will vote for bad policies because of the influence of the education industrial complex. So there's that too. Let's talk about just a couple bills. We're coming up on an hour here, so I want to let you go. And of course, it's almost my bedtime. But do you want to talk about which bills do you want to talk about? We talked about touched on 5620. Do you want me to pull that up?
Yeah, pull it up. I'm not well read on this one enough, but it sort of has me a little concerned. I would love to get somebody's input who has more knowledge about this. I haven't had any personal experience with it, so I don't know enough about it, but it looked like it could be important that people want to think about. It's only 3 pages, but there was one thing in particular that came up to me, and that was in section 2. It adds a new section to chapter 74.13 in the RCW. It's section 2. It's on the second page, line 23. Basically, the youth are placed in out-of-home care subject to dependency proceedings under chapter 13.34 RCW have the following rights. And one of those rights is, let me find it, where is it? To consent to their adoption or guardianship if over age 14. And so to me, that sounds like they're given the right to basically pick who's their guardian, who is in effect their guardian. So if they happen to, there's no due process there, they can just pick. I mean, so my questions here, there's a lot of questions I have about this particular part and what effect it has if it's misused. So, and then it goes on to kind of list a couple of other things. Really, they're trying to, again, I think with this Children's Bill of Rights, essentially, I think that in foster care, they're trying to codify more potential parental alienation with 5620. That's what it looks like to me.
I think so too. And I just want to, for everybody that's watching us right now, when Eric brought this to my attention before we jumped on tonight, he was like, yeah, it's codifying the rights of kids in foster care. I'm like, well, how does that concern us? And then as we started reading through this, I'm like, oh. And so I just want to point out that a child can go to, say, a youth shelter or a host home, and they can be connected with legal services. Like there's LCYF, which is like legal services for children, youth, and family. And I know this, I've had personal experience with these people. So I'm speaking from experience, and they will help a child file a CHINS petition and basically become, have someone else be designated as their guardian rather than the parent. And if you're in Washington, you probably know that the judicial system is captured. So if, let's say, your child is in a shelter in Seattle, they're going to go to a King County court with a lawyer from this LCYF or some other leftist legal organization, and they're going to take these legal steps to basically remove your parental rights to your child. And then with a bill like this, if this were to become law, your child, if over 14, could consent to their own guardianship or adoption. So for me, especially with the experience that we've had with our daughter, I look at this, and fortunately she's 18 now, so I don't have the same kinds of anxiety over these things as I did then, but I can see the very real threat. I can see exactly the end goal with a bill like this. And it's not just to protect homeless kids or or youth in, in some kind of danger, especially on the heels of Senate Bill 5599, where the kids who want so-called gender affirming care can then go to a host home or a youth shelter. This on top of that, and as I'm sort of talking this out, Eric, I'm starting to get like 5599 vibes from this bill.
Yep.
Like it's that level of bad.
Yep. That's what it looks like. I'm going to have to do a little more digging on this to see what effect it has. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, this is that if we go back to that if we take it, for example, what's developed for the RCW that we've met here tonight to discuss, we can take that, what we've learned there from the movement of what was built in 1985 and how that's changed over the years to what its effect is today in 2025. Bills like this, on its face, well, who doesn't want to help foster kids? I mean, everybody wants to help all children for the most, except for the most terrible. But in this case, what is the potential? And I think in Washington State, we don't have the luxury of not considering that, what the potential harm could be of this. And yeah, when I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's really expansive, because we're taking away the due process of like emancipation. Like what is even the point of having a process for emancipation if there's loopholes and ways around it through these other various systems? Very, very bad stuff. And I think I look at this a little cynically. I don't know about you, but I do. I think so. Anytime I see certain people who've drafted and sponsored these bills, I'll be honest, I see their names and I think that is something that I need to be concerned about. And 5599, when we discovered that and that was becoming law, same thing here. And we got the same kind of cast of characters attaching themselves to this. I think this is one that could see potential harm down in the future. So
Yep, absolutely. And just kind of people are asking, how are they going to pay for this? Yes, they're going to raise your taxes, but you've looked deep into Senate Bill 5007. I've looked deep into it. Joy's looked deep into it. Leslie's, we've all gone down the rabbit hole on Senate Bill 5007, which had a public hearing today in the Ways and Means Committee. And this is about addressing chronic absenteeism in schools. And it actually has a fiscal note of more than $71 million over the next 5 years. That would go through OSPI, would have oversight over this money, and that it would be granted out to community-based organizations. So and this is a Republican bill. So on the one hand, you've got Republicans saying, no more money for OSPI. Oh, but how about 71 million for these community-based organization grants? And the plan is that these CBOs will make home visits. They'll refer kids to mental health care. They'll provide non-academic supports like clothing, food, transportation. Where are they taking them? If your kid wants gender affirming care, maybe the CBO is going to, and so it's really easy to see how this bill is going to get abused. And it's not just, it's any kids. It's any absence, excused or unexcused. And so our parents, Joy had this example of our parents going to start sending their kids to school with lice because they're afraid of their kid racking up too many absences and getting on the radar of the chronic absenteeism program. So, it seems to me, Eric, that there's a lot more of these education bills in, funding and different types of programs for education that are all sort of tied into this indoctrinating kids and which is all the indoctrination that's going on in the schools is all part of the child alienation project.
I would agree. I mean, we've seen how the healthcare and the education system inside of Washington has started to commingle. In a lot of ways, they're desk and desk in some locations. I remember embarking on a campaign locally here with my local county health department regarding vaccines and
I
things.
remember that.
And they were in collaboration with the schools. Like it was like, oh yeah, I talked to so and so. Like they were just back and forth about things. So stuff like this, has the potential in the wrong hands to absolutely be used. I mean, to have just CBO
Right.
organization showing up at your doorstep to check on your kids. Yeah, that's a whole other level. But I mean, you're right. The potential is here
Yep.
for that sort of thing to occur. And, based on absences, which may or may not have a good reason. Pretty wild.
Yeah.
And this is a bipartisan supported bill too, right? So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Joyce, I put Joy's testimony on. I put the video up on our YouTube channel and all of our social media networks. She just laid down the facts and said, "You guys need to kill the bill." I have a feeling that Senator Lisa Wellman, she's got her hands in it, and Claire Wilson and some of those folks, probably Marco Elias. So. I have a feeling it's too late for Braun to kill this bill, but it's bad news. So homeschool your kids if you can. I know you're doing that, Eric. So you made that leap, and
I know I wouldn't say.
What's that?
We've kind of gone into. I wouldn't say it's particularly like the normal way of homeschool. There's actually state curriculum that's offered through. And so that's sort of the only way I can make it work. But what it does is it gives me more input and direction as far as how it's digested, if that makes sense. Rather than just sitting in a box, at the public school with these other kids that may or may not be good influence. At least my kid is here with me, and we're metering our social interaction with this terrible stuff as best we can. I think it's a good happy medium to a certain amount. I don't think it's a fix-all, because there's certain things that are wrong. It's missing some of the social interactions and things that are beneficial. Let's be honest. But at the same time, maybe social interactions in today's present day schools aren't super great. So it gives us some flexibility. I would like to be able to homeschool purely, but it's just not. I mean, as a single dad of 2 kids, I don't really have the leeway to do that, to be honest. So,
I think, and that's a good point, is that like everybody's got to figure out like what can you make work that's an improvement for your kids.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's giving yourself the grace and the kids the grace, but trying to do something that moves things in a better direction for your kids is really important. So you're an awesome dad, Eric. Your kids are lucky to have you.
Well, thank you. I try. And likewise, you're an awesome mom. We're here to be, the advocates for our kids. That's our job.
Right. And who would have thought my kid would have been watching on YouTube like 4 years ago? Who would have thought my kid would be watching us live stream on YouTube?
That's pretty awesome. I mean,
yeah,
we're handing them the keys to be stewards of their own future here, I think. And that's, I think for me, I know it was not a failure for my parents, but I didn't understand some of this stuff. And I think that what we're doing today is laying the groundwork so that they'll do better in the future.
Yeah.
So.
Well,
I appreciate you helping.
Yeah. And I think, we didn't, like, no one's parented kids of the, social media generation and the iPhone generation and stuff. So what we're dealing with is all new. And it's not good. And we could do a whole live stream just about, technology and its impact on kids and all that. But I think we're going to try to do a little series on this. And, we just kind of hit on this one RCW and a couple bills, but this reaches into the schools and some other other areas that impact kids. And this is, definitely a passion point for both of us. So if you guys like this video, you like this live stream and this content, and you'd like to see us, kind of share more about this particular issue, definitely leave a comment in the chat, or if you're watching on replay, let us know what you'd like to see in the future, if you'd like to see more content like this, and we'll make it happen. We'll get it scheduled. You in?
Do it. I'm in.
All right.
Count me in.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. And if you aren't already subscribed to our Substack, that is the best way to learn about, get our breaking alerts and calls to action. We send out emails almost daily. So it's just conservativeladiesofamerica.substack.com. And of course, we're on all the social media platforms, and we would love to engage with you. So thanks for joining us tonight. Please be sure to share the YouTube link with all your friends, and especially parents in Washington, so they know about what's going on and how to protect their kids. And thanks, Eric, for your time tonight.
Thanks, chat, for having me, Julie. Next time.
Always, anytime.